Okay, continuing on in the section talking about hedging strategies using futures. There's discussion here of using a cross hedge, and that is we talked about this in an earlier video. If you want to hedge pineapple juice, there are no contracts, no standard contracts on pineapple juice. So you might consider using orange juice. I've got some other examples here. There's no contract on jet fuel, but there is on heating oil. There's no contract on sunflower oil, but there is on soybean oils, that kind of thing. So you might use another contract. The important thing, though, is that obviously the commodity that you're taking out the futures on needs to have a price that moves pretty much in step with the commodity you're concerned about, the commodity your spot position is going to be in. All right. So we have some techniques that we use to help hedge work better, and we'll talk about these. So I've got here, and I just made these numbers up, but just, I've got a futures contract. You might consider that this is orange juice and this is pineapple juice, all right? And what happens here is that, I've got the change in the futures price, and we've looked at this over the last 10 months. In the first month, the futures price went down 7, the spot price went down 3.5, and then you can see futures went up 7, the spot went up 3.5, and you can see that relationship there. And I've got here, what's the relationship between the change in the spot price and the change in the futures price? Now you can look at that and see that the spot price moves half as much as the futures price. Okay, and so when you say how would this affect the design of your hedge? Well, if you fully expected this this type of relationship to continue, then you'd only need half as many contracts to hedge your position in the spot price as the total position you're going to take. You need half as many futures contracts on the other one because its price moves twice as much. Okay, so yeah, I've got a little chart here. The slope of this line in that case would be 1/2. Okay, and that's one way we do this is we say, okay, well, if we plot the futures price that we're concerned about, the change in the futures price on the x-axis and the change in our spot price on the y-axis, what's the slope of that line? And that tells us how many contracts we need. All right. It doesn't tell us how many contracts, it tells us how to adjust the number of contracts that we need. Okay, and I changed it here where now it's 4 times, the spot price changes 4 times as much as the futures price. Right, and you can see a much higher slope, and so we would need 4 times the number of contracts that we would typically use in this case. Okay, and I think they use the term hedge ratio in the text. They use the notation H here, and it tells you, it's a multiplier times the number of contracts that you need. So I think of it as, well, if the hedge was going to work perfectly, if I'm using exactly the same asset, there's a futures contract on exactly the asset I need, how many contracts would I need? Okay, but since I'm not, I have to take that number of perfect contracts times the hedge ratio, and that'll tell me how many. So I've got, and just a discussion here, these things never move exactly, you never have perfect correlation between these things. So, when we make this plot, you always look at it and say, well, do I have any correlation there at all? And in this case, you couldn't find any. You'd say, well, if I look at this, there's no correlation between those two prices. So I can't use this futures contract to hedge this, whatever it is, the spot position I'm taking. There's just no relationship here. Okay, now on the other hand, if it looks like this, you'd say, oh, okay, well, it's not perfect. It's not always exactly the same, but there's certainly some relationship here. Right? You could draw what we drew is we draw the best fit regression line through there. And you could say, okay, well, if I go off the slope of that line, that's probably my best estimate of how to adjust the number of contracts that I need. Okay, and I've got it here. Yeah. So here you would say, it just doesn't seem to be any correlation there. But here certainly you could hedge with this and use the slope of that line. By the way, I'll just remind you in there, I imagine you guys have had linear regression before. Just remind you of, I'm sorry, I touched my screen and it messed up my. Okay, in this video, we're going to continue on talking about futures. Dang. Okay, so yeah, you could not use these two, but obviously there's a relationship between this one. Okay, all right, and here's the equation that we're looking at, the hedge ratio. This is the slope of the linear regression line. This is the statistics that you go through to figure out the slope of the best fit line. And you notice what we have here is this rho, which is the correlation coefficient between the two assets. And then you have the sigma means the standard deviation of the change in the spot prices. And sigma here means the standard deviation of the change in the futures prices. All right, so given that information, you can calculate this hedge ratio, or you could plot the points and fit the best regression line through there and take the slope of that regression line. You're doing the same thing. Okay. So I have an example here where I'm hedging again. I'm using the example of pineapple juice and orange juice futures. I've got the standard deviation of the change in orange juice, pineapple juice prices and orange juice prices, and I have the correlation between those two. And so just using my formula here. The only tricky thing here is you got to remember, what's in the denominator, what's in the numerator. The denominator is the futures that you're using. The numerator is the spot. So I would do that. And so, if these were the statistics I had, I would say, okay, well, I'll figure out how many contracts I need if this hedge was going to work perfectly. If I were using exactly the same asset to hedge that I'm taking a spot position in, and then I'll multiply that number by 0.48 to get the number of contracts. So I've got an example here. Glenn has 30,000 pounds of pineapple juice to hedge. Each orange juice futures contract is for 15,000 pounds. So how many OJ futures contracts should he use? Well, the contracts needed for a perfect hedge, well, if I'm trying to hedge 30,000 pounds and there's 15,000 pounds per contract, that would be two, right? And that would be if these things moved exactly the same, right? But they don't. So I'm going to multiply that value of 2 times my hedge ratio. And that says I need 0.96 contracts. Now, obviously, I have to use a whole number here. So I would round the nearest whole number, and that would be one contract, right? And that's how I would do that. Okay, so that's just a little bit on cross hedges. Example there,